Virgo is the mutable earth sign. It's said to be ruled by Mercury, but I can't quite get that. I think there is another ruler to be found for Virgo. Mercury works really well for Gemini, and it's certainly got a resonance with Virgo, one cannot deny that. But does it get to the essence of Virgo? Not for my money. Anyway, it's helpful to know that Virgo is associated with Mercury, so we'll just stay with that. Now, when we're considering the expressions of Virgo, we start with conviction. And the first degree of Virgo, which is the man's head, this is all about developing conviction, working out what is significant, just developing a sense of this can be ignored and avoided, and this has to be taken seriously, just to sort things out. And we come to an understanding of Virgo's ability of analysis. They really can tell the difference between what's right and what's wrong in a way that other signs cannot, in some way, in their particular way. It's earthy, so it's grounded, it's real, it checks out, and yet it's seeking perfection. The nth degree of Virgo is perfecting. But we start with that which we have to learn in order to know what to perfect. So conviction is where we start. Virgo 2 is the large white cross upraised. And this image of the cross is indicative of Christianity and therefore spirituality. And raising it up shows that you're accepting it and perhaps deferring to it. And yet the implication within Christianity is that suffering is an aspect of one's spiritual path, and Christ suffered in order that we should be saved in some way. That's the teaching of Christianity. And we have here the understanding that Virgo wants to bring is that when you actually suffer, you learn. When you need to learn something, you've got to expect to suffer a bit. So that they understand that there's a relationship in some way, no pain, no gain, that kind of thing. Virgo 3 is called the two angels bringing protection. And this is an affirmation of higher personal power. Now, these angels can be ourselves, actually, at a higher level of consciousness. We must connect to God. If we're from God, then we connect still to God. And on that journey back along that line, at the top end, there is an angelic sense of self. So each of us is partly angel. And the angels that we relate to may well be those, our own, as it were. But we can also relate to other angels, and there are angels protecting us. Angels, what is that but an energy field, a degree of consciousness beyond our own, very much beyond our own, an archetype. You know, it's not a silly little white fairy that you put on a Christmas tree. It's kind of a real energy. It's an archetype, like the fundamental principle of some kind or other. And if we tune in to that level, two angels protecting us, there's the 2 points of view, there's this and there's that. And either way, we have to consider the essence, the archetype of a situation to know what it is in great depth, to develop conviction. In Virgo 4, we're reminded not to be silly about prejudice. The black child playing with the white children, it's all about release of prejudice, and don't think that you've understood something until you've experienced it. Don't think that you can anticipate what an event will mean before you're living that event. That wouldn't be meaningful. It would just be putting out your imagination onto the field of inquiry without taking account the indisputable facts of the matter, which exist. You might be told a lie, you might have to delve to analyse and so on, but the facts of the matter do exist somewhere, and you can find them out, and you won't find that out with prejudice. You will only discover the truth if you look with an open mind. Virgo 5, we have a man dreaming of fairies. envisioning. And this is quite contrasted, isn't it, to where we've been going with this study. In the end, despite all that I've said, in the end, we imagine. We're partly living in that imaginal realm. We're not all to do with earth-based facts of the matter information. There's this other side to us. And in the final analysis, it's how we make up our interpretation of fact into truth, into reality, into something, albeit subjective, our own truth, but nevertheless something that we can feel gives us conviction. We're certain of it. So that's the first expression. And in the second expression, we study adaptation with Virgo 6, the merry-go-round, coming to terms with the life force. The merry-go-round is a circular device for children to play on, and usually there are horses that go up and down as they go around. This is symbolic, a good metaphor for life. We go around and around in circles, we go up and down, we have our successes and our failures, but it keeps on spinning. Yeah, simple metaphor. And we have to come to terms with that in real terms. Sometimes we do okay, sometimes we don't. We got to adapt. Sometimes there is what we want, sometimes there isn't. You know, we just have to adapt. It's a simple teaching, really. In Virgo 7, we have the harem image. These women are sitting around all day doing nothing but trying to look beautiful. And they have to come to terms with the fact that their lives, it's not really about doing anything very much, if at all. They have to learn what being is. We all have that to learn. What to be as life is going up and down on its merry-go-round. What to be. And we have to adapt to the changes according to what we are, who we are. Not what we do, but who we are. We have to adapt so that there is an interface, a relationship between what is wanted of us and what we want to give, who we are taken to be and who we take ourselves to be. There's always some friction, some tension that needs to be adapted to within that formula. Now, Virgo 8, the first dancing instruction, talks to us about guidance, learning, training, apprenticeship. A lot to learn, isn't there? You know, there's a lot to learn. And we can't just assume that we know the answer. Sometimes we have to ask someone. We have to sit at the feet of a master and take instruction. And that's a very particular process, taking instruction, bearing in mind that we have been taught already by parents who got it wrong quite often, by Sunday school teachers and school teachers and older friends and siblings. All of them got it wrong insofar as it's our reality. Nobody can tell us what our reality is. They can guide us and give a sense of their own reality and perhaps their sense, and that's what it is, it's their opinion of collective reality, which they're considering to be truth. But it's all wrong. It's not all of it wrong, but they're all a little bit wrong. And we have to come to terms with that and to take instruction from a master, knowing that the master knows more than us, but not everything. That requires a certain attitude of being. Too many people give themselves over to spiritual teachers and stuff. Foolishly. No one knows all of the answers to your life. You do. You're the only one. Other people refuse to take guidance. Foolish. You don't know everything. You don't know very much. You've got to take guidance if you want to go anywhere. So to find that way of being with an instructor, that's quite a skill. Now when we get to Virgo 9, a man making a futurist drawing, we're talking about the kind of thing that an architect does. He sees the house and then he draws the technical drawing which will eventually be used to create that house. Well, we are architects of our own future. And we have to some extent, visualize what we're creating. And the more detailed we can make that visualization, the more likely it is that we will realize it. And here's a man making futurist drawings. He's got a good imagination, a radical imagination. He can change the working principles in his world just by the force of his imagination. So he's going to come up with an adaptation of the relationship between who he is and how things are that works for him by adapting how things are in this case. Very interesting approach. In Virgo 10, we have two heads looking out and beyond the shadows. And here we have two, again, the polarity and the mind's ability to grasp that there exists two different versions of every situation. At least two, but two means more than one. So if you can see things from both points of view, then you can see from a super position. You're a supervisor. You're in a supervisory position. And we try to gain that sense of greater objectivity, knowing that we can't go the whole distance with that. But we can see more if we look. So we have two heads. We can see this side and that side of a particular argument. The third expression is reorientation. And this begins with Virgo 11, a boy moulded in his mother's aspirations for him. And it's to do with this process of creative visualization that we've already discussed, taken to the next level. Here's a mother who really wants her boy to be everything that he wants himself to be. It's pure delight in his beingness. And she's proud of her offspring in a rather narcissistic way, if truth be told, that she puts that onto the boy. And to some extent, that raises the boy up. And to some extent, it binds him into her sense of him. So there's a certain limitation and a certain expansiveness here. And we have to change our way of being in order to come to terms with the fact that society, especially Mum, wants us to be a certain way to please them. And okay, that works for us up to a point. We like to be raised, we like to serve and so on. But what about when it goes against our base nature, our essential nature, our animal nature and our essence nature, the foundation nature? What happens then? Well, we have to find a way with that. In Virgo 12, the bride with her veil snatched away, this indicates a sense of claiming. You've gone through the process of courtship with your bride. You've made the arrangement. Everybody's happy. She wants to be exposed. You want to expose her as the groom in this example. So you rip away the veil. Not gently ask her if she wouldn't mind removing it. There are some situations where we have to just grasp, grab, take, because that's the nature of things. It's the nature of life, that not everything that we need and we want and we deserve and we can claim, not everything is offered to us. There are some times when we have to claim it. Like fruit on a tree, there it is, offering itself to us in one sense, but unless we claim it, we can't have it. And so this ability that Virgo has to know what to claim, distinguishing between what not to take and what to take, is a reorientation. Now in Virgo 13, the strong hand supplanting political hysteria is rather aligned with charisma. And in a sense, the charisma of knowledge, the charisma of right living, of decency. Certain people behave well, and this gives them a certain influence through the power of charisma. And that has to be used sometimes to settle people. Mostly people get emotional when things go wrong. Mostly there's an emotion that occurs. And when that is communicable, it perhaps is the emotion of dread or anxiety or excitement. It could be any fear-based emotion, certainly. It spreads. And that spreading is called hysteria. And it takes a certain type of person to calm it down. If it's not calmed, then it will be damaging. Hysteria is not a positive force. So you have to develop the ability to deal with situations, knowing that at times it's going to be emotional. Now, Virgo's not overly emotional compared to the other signs, and it doesn't really want hysteria in its life. It's not a drama queen. It wants to calm that down so it can reorient back to that which is reasonable and rational and workable. So it brings to bear its charisma to do that. Virgo 14, the family tree, is all about roots and that which is giving us our sense of self. Parents, grandparents, ancestors, all the way back. They've given us a family identity, and we may not think much of it. We may even disdain it until we get to a certain age. And then we realize that actually certain qualities we have and abilities we have and knowledge that we have were passed down to us. And this gives us a sense of respecting our roots and realigning with our roots, reorienting to this family sense of identity. And indeed, in Virgo 15, you have the ornamental handkerchief, an heirloom. Now, some things passed down from grandparents to us, they're rubbish. It's just nostalgia. It doesn't do anything. But other things are precious. They may well be not really currently useful, but they carry something. And we have to determine, not talk about handkerchiefs now, we have to determine what comes down from the family tree that can be used properly, and that which can be ditched. We are the latest, and in fact the only powerful element of our family line, our generation. We have to reorient it to meet the current times and change who we are in response to the times that are unfolding, and they're all different. We have to learn about that. The next expression is cultivation, and this is where we learn to cope with the requirements of civilization to limit our self-expression. And in Virgo 16, we get to see that our self-expression can be rather passionate, animal-like, primitive, like the orangutans. So we have to deal with that. And in Virgo 17, the volcano in eruption is saying, look, if you don't, it's going to blow up on you. So it must. And we release some of this stored up frustrations of our animal passions that have been overly cultivated into societies or civilizations' requirements. We release these in cathartic episodes. And we're allowed to do that sometimes, the Christmas and Halloween and All Fool's Day, and when we're having a houseboat party. And there are opportunities for us to release our inner tensions, and a cathartic episode with a counsellor, for example. So these are bound to happen. We do have volcanoes ready to go off. Now in 18, the Ouija board, we have a sense of developing intuition. If we were to completely destroy our animal nature, which is being argued against here, we wouldn't have intuition. We wouldn't have access to direct knowledge. I think the animal knowledge is more instinctual, but that's closer to intuition than rationality. We would lose a part of our direct feminine knowledge if we surrendered our animal nature. And we're encouraged in Virgo 18 to develop it by playing with things like Ouija boards and, let's say, tarot cards and astrological predictions and those kind of things. We don't know whether they're right or wrong at the time, but we develop the intuition to find out. And practicing these esoteric techniques gives us the possibility of developing our intuition further. In Virgo 19, we have the swimming race, in which we learn about competition. Now, competition isn't really about beating the opponent. It's about beating yourself, trying to beat your personal best, which you will only be stimulated to do by competing with others. But it's not about the competition. It's about stretching, following a role model, reaching up, doing your best, cultivating the possibility within you to flower into something more. Now, Virgo 20, the automobile caravan, this is all about a group of people traveling together. They tend to kind of go to the beach all on the same day, and the caravans are following each other along the road to the beach. They're all doing it on the same day, at the same time, for the same reason. Even though they're acting individually, independently, there's this collective direction or flow. And we're like that. We might think of ourselves as independent, unique, and so on. And yeah, okay. That's within the flow of everything around us. That requires that we cultivate resonance with the collective urges. The zeitgeist of our community moves us in a given direction, and we join in a cooperative kind of way. Now, the next expression is responsibility, and this begins with Virgo 21, a girls' basketball team, where we allow ourselves to become receptive to collective forces. The team itself is a collective force, and if we don't put ourselves in a receptive mode, we can't be a team player. And that's bad news, not only for the team, who's just lost a player because we're not playing with them, but for us, because we've lost group consciousness. Individual consciousness feels wonderful, and yet you move yourself at a higher level through this process into group consciousness, and it's much higher, much more wonderful. Virgo 22, the royal coat of arms. This is when responsibility moves us up a notch in society. This is aristocratic responsibility. Those who own the land have to care for it. They have to tend that which would not be looked after properly if it was owned by people of a lesser level of responsibility. And for all we disdain aristocracy and the privilege and the wealth of privilege, actually they carry out responsibilities that most of us couldn't hold down. They're trained from birth into leadership, and even if they do it in a selfish way sometimes, nevertheless, leadership is better than chaos, typically. So Virgo 23, the animal trainer, indicates the importance of our taking this higher level of responsibility, because we have a lion to tame. The orangutan is now a lion. It's even more difficult in a sense. It's more violent, more aggressive, and so on. So at a higher level of responsibility, we can actually go deeper into our animal self and actually access the lion of our nature. You know, the commander, the I'm the king of the jungle kind of energy. You can take command of a situation if you've cultivated your animal nature enough to take responsibility for it at a very, very high level. This animal trainer is taking responsibility for, keeping a lion controlled. Is hugely responsible for the lives of others, So we have to do that for ourselves. We have to contain the animal nature of ourselves if we want to take the highest level of community responsibility. And in Virgo 24, you have the sense in which this responsibility, it could only be achieved when we're pure of spirit. And we have the image of Mary and her white lamb being innocent. Despite having this animal nature available, now that it's tamed, we can behave innocently and spontaneously and just do whatever. We don't have to guard ourselves from spontaneity because it's dangerous. It's no longer dangerous. We just cannot let out the animal nature because we've reached that very high level of mastery of self. And in Virgo 25, the flag at half-mast, this is not about death, this is about community approval. Those of them who have mastered themselves at such a high level that they can take responsibility at the highest level, they're the ones whose death brings us to want to show that level of respect, which is indicated by the flag at half-mast. So when we actually attain that very, very high level of responsibility, we master our animal nature and we become pure of spirit and innocent of purpose, then our community will recognize us as special. Now, the final expression of Virgo is perfecting. And this is where we kind of tend to think of Virgo, in that level of really trying to get things right, absolutely right, to the nth degree. And some people would say that that's very difficult indeed. It's a burden. And others would see that as a tremendous gift, that possibility of receiving sufficient motivation to make yourself constantly improve all of the time, correcting, improving, making things right, getting things right, being an example for people of how to get things right. So this is what we're moving in now with this final expression of perfecting. And the 26th degree of Virgo is the boy with the censer. And here he is swinging the incense in a cathedral or a church, a young boy, a masculine image, assertive, trying to do something here, but a boy, innocent and not particularly powerful, just hoping that people will follow his example. And his example is how to create sacredness. And this is food for thought, that perfecting begins with how to create sacredness. Can we? Do we know how to create sacredness? It can arise naturally in the birth of a child or the death of someone, or sometimes when you see amazing things in nature, make you feel the presence of God. But can you create it? This boy with the censer can. Virgo 27, the grand dames at tea, they can create it as well in their way. They're just drinking tea, and they have this way of drinking tea, and they have certain clothes to wear and certain courtesies to observe and certain opinions to hold. And it's all very, very shallow on one level. But on another level, it is done to perfection. And it is done in a ritual way, which they think of as sacred. And in their way, they are achieving a perfection. And this was how it was in all of polite society, shall we call it, in that period, in the palaces and stately homes around Europe particularly. These people were acting as though they were higher than they were, that they were of a stock, not the peasant stock. They were greater than. They were trying to be perfect in all that they did. In Virgo 28, you have the bald-headed man making a claim. He's saying, look, I can see the difference between right and wrong, good and bad, perfect and imperfect. I can see that, and I want you to enact my requirements. It's not enough just to know what perfecting requires. You got to do something to move it in that direction, and making a claim with the authority of a man who's being assertive and has a presence of authority about him. That's what it requires. You know, perfecting is not a loner's game. You have to interact with people from a point of, I know what's right and you don't. Quite assertive. In 29 Virgo, you have a man gaining secret knowledge from a paper he is reading. And we're looking here at borrowing suggestions that have passed the test of time. Scriptures written thousands of years ago have been kept alive for thousands of years because someone's thought it worthwhile to do that. And it very often has required money and sacrifice and so on to keep these documents alive. And so we look at those, we read those, we don't necessarily agree, disagree, we just read them so that we know about them. And we take that into account and measure that against our experience of the moment in hand. And we reach an informed opinion then about knowledge, about what works, about what's practical, about what's real, to develop our sense of the perfect appraisal that we can make to describe the meaning of life. And then in Virgo 30, you have this false call unheard in attention to immediate service. This is all to do with the perfection of attention, the power of attention. We cannot expect everything in life to go through any process of improvement, let alone perfecting, unless the mind is doing exactly that. And to hold the mind so clearly on the object of your attention that you're not distracted by anything. Somebody calls your name, you ignore it because you've decided to focus on the matter in hand. That's the perfection of mind. There's a little story in Sufism about how difficult it is to hold the mind's attention on a specific focus. The student of Sufism, a dervish, is asking his Sufi master, is it possible to say one prayer without losing your focus of attention? I have a black camel and a white camel here. You can choose which you want. If you manage just to repeat the prayer once through and not think about anything else. And the Sufi master accepted this challenge and he repeated the prayer, the Islamic prayer. And at the end, the student, a dervish, asked him, so did you do it? Did you manage to hold your attention on the prayer? And he said, no, I failed. And the dervish said, well, what were you thinking of? And what was distracting you? He said, I was trying to make up my mind whether to go for the black or the white camel. Even Sufi masters are attracted by temptations of the earth. We all are. So the ability that Virgo tries to develop is eventually a mental discipline, the ability to focus the attention without being distracted.